Hi, welcome back to our Introduction to the Special Senses. In this presentation, we're working on the anatomy of the eye and its associated structures. We're going to work our way from outside to in, starting with the accessory structures of the eye. These includes the eyelids, the epithelium that covers the surface of the eye, and the lacrimal apparatus. The eyelids are properly known as palpebrae. Palpebrae is plural. Singular would be palpebra. So you have a superior palpebra and an inferior palpebra, an upper and lower eyelid. These are, of course, covered with skin on the outside, and on the inside they are lined with conjunctiva. The epithelium that covers the surface of the eye also lines the inside of the eyelids. The corners of the eye are more properly known as the canthus, medial canthus and lateral canthus. The palpebral fissure is just a fancy name for the gap between the eyelids through which you can see. The tarsal glands sometimes get inflamed or impacted, and so that's something you probably need to be aware of. These are small glands in between where the eyelashes originate, along the rim of the eyelid. The conjunctiva has two layers. One layer lines the eyelids, and the other layer, the ocular layer, covers the surface of the eye. It's a very thin epithelial layer continuous with the skin. Here we can see in a view of the eye the lateral canthus and the medial canthus. The lacrimal apparatus produces, secretes, and drains the tears. The lacrimal secretions include lysozyme, which is an enzyme that can break down bacterial cell walls. Tears pass through a specific pathway. I think it'll be easier if we just look at the picture to study these structures. So here you can see the lacrimal gland is superior and lateral to the eye. It has its own multiple ducts which drain onto the surface of the eye. Lacrimal fluid then washes over the surface of the eye and drains on the medial canthus of the eye through the puncta. A punctum is a little hole, and you can actually see the little holes in your eyelid if, while looking in a mirror, you just pull the eyelid away from the surface of your eye. You'll see the neat little hole, which is the lacrimal punctum. You have a superior one and an inferior one. The fluid that drains through the puncta then goes through small canals, canaliculi, into the lacrimal sac. From the lacrimal sac through the nasolacrimal duct. This is all passing through a canal in the lacrimal bone, draining ultimately through underneath of the inferior nasal concha into the nasal cavity. This explains why when you cry your nose runs. Okay, moving to the eye itself, there are three layers to the eye. The outermost layer is called the fibrous layer. There's a middle vascular layer, and the inner layer is also known as the nervous layer. The eyeball itself is hollow. It's divided into a large posterior cavity and a smaller anterior cavity. As you can see in the picture, the dividing line is at the lens. So behind the lens, the very large posterior cavity, in front of the lens, the smaller anterior cavity. The layers are easily seen in a horizontal section. The fibrous layer consists of the anterior cornea, which is transparent, and the posterior sclera, which is the white of the eye. The middle vascular layer, also known as the uvea, has three parts: the iris, which is the colored portion of the eye, the ciliary body, which attaches to the lens, and the very large choroid, which lines the posterior cavity of the eye. Deep to the choroid is the neural layer, which consists of the retina. The neural layer has two parts, the neural layer and the pigmented layer. In this figure you can also see the optic nerve and its attachment point to the retina, and a very thin depression at one very special part of the retina, as we'll see in the next picture. In this view, let's get oriented. So here you can see that this is the medial portion of the skull. There's the nose. You're looking down at it, so this is a right eye. This is the medial rectus muscle. This is the lateral rectus muscle. Here you can see the sclera cut away. You can see the choroid connecting to the ciliary body and the iris. And here you can see the retina. Again, here is the optic disc, the point of attachment of the retina to the optic nerve, and our very thin little depression, which is called the fovea. Notice that the fovea is the terminal point of the visual axis. The visual axis is the pathway that light takes from an object that is directly in front of you. So when you are looking directly at an object, light from that object hits the fovea of your retina. Our fibrous layer, remember, has two parts, the cornea, which is the transparent anterior portion, and the sclera. The sclera is made of very tough collagen fibers, layers and layers and layers of them. The corneal proteins are specially arranged to allow light to penetrate them. There are no blood vessels in the cornea, so that light is not obstructed in any way. In the vascular layer, or uvea, remember there are three parts. The part that provides the route for blood vessels and lymphatics is in the posterior of the eye. That's the choroid. The part that regulates the amount of light entering the eye is the iris. And the part that secretes aqueous humor and controls the shape of the lens is the ciliary body. So again, looking at our image, we can see the choroid, the ciliary body attached to the lens, and the iris forming the vascular layer. The iris contains papillary muscles to change the diameter of the pupil. Let's take a look. There are two layers of muscles in the iris. The pupillary dilator muscles are radial, that is, they radiate out like the spokes of a bicycle. When they contract, they pull back on the edge of the pupil. That enlarges the opening or dilates the pupil. This occurs when light is dim and is caused by sympathetic stimulation. Underneath of it, and barely visible in this view, is a pupillary constrictor or sphincter muscle that when it contracts, it makes the pupil much smaller, reducing the amount of light coming into the eye. And you do that when you have increased light intensity, and that is under parasympathetic control. The ciliary body contains ciliary processes and ciliary muscles. The ciliary muscles attach to the suspensory ligaments of the lens, as we'll see in our next presentation. The ciliary processes produce the aqueous humor. The choroid layer is the vascular layer in the posterior cavity of the eye. It provides blood and lymphatics to the retina. The retina itself is part of the inner layer. There are actually two layers to the retina. The pigmented layer is a layer of epithelium that produces melanin. Melanin absorbs stray light rays, which helps improve vision. The retina itself consists of several layers, the most important of which is the photoreceptor cells. There are two kinds of photoreceptors, the rods and cones. Rods work in dim light, cones work in bright light, and cones also provide you with color vision. So again, as we see in this view, you can focus this time on the retina. And here's that fovea. The fovea contains only cones, and the density of cones decreases and the density of rods increases as you move out towards the outer edge of the retina. Here in this view, we're looking at the layers of the retina. Get oriented by imagining light passing through the cornea, the lens, and striking the retina. So as light strikes the retina, it has to pass through all the layers of the retina to get to the rods and cones. Rods and cones are embedded in that pigmented part of the retina. Here's the pigmented epithelial layer of the retina, and here are the cones and the rods. When they are struck by light and get excited sufficiently, they send electrical signals to the bipolar cells, and the bipolar cells then send electrical signals to the ganglion cells. And it's the ganglion cells whose axons form the optic nerve. So here in this view, again, you can see there's the choroid, the pigmented part of the retina, the rods and cones here, the bipolar cells here, and the ganglion cells with their axons forming the optic nerves. And again, seeing the axons of the ganglion cells forming the optic nerve. The point of attachment of the retina, where it joins with the optic nerve, is called the optic disc. And as you can see in this view, there are no rods or cones at the point of the optic nerve. In this view, here is the optic disc, the point of attachment. You can tell because you can see the blood vessels radiating out from that point. And here off to the side is the fovea. Remember, the fovea is only cones. So the optic disc, because it contains no rods and cones, is also known as the blind spot. And here's a quick test you can do of the blind spot. With one eye closed, focus your open eye on the cross and hold the paper at arm's length and move it slightly to your side, to the outside, until you can see the spot disappear. You can do that with your right eye. You can either turn the paper upside down or just swap spot for cross with your left eye. Here's another way to check it. Find a patterned background like a black and white tile bathroom floor. Hold your index finger in front of you. Close the other eye. Hold the index finger right in front and move it off to the side just a little at a time until you can see the top of your finger just kind of disappear. Your brain is filling in what it thinks should be in that spot. So you can trick your brain into not realizing that it's revealing the blind spot. We're going to talk a little bit about the chambers of the eye. Sometimes students get chambers and cavities confused, so let's make sure you have those straight. The posterior cavity is behind the lens. It is filled with a single chamber, the vitreous chamber, which contains the vitreous body, also known as the vitreous humor, which is just a large blob of a jelly-like substance. The anterior cavity has two chambers, a posterior chamber and an anterior chamber, subdivided at the iris. So, in the anterior cavity, aqueous humor circulates. Remember, the aqueous humor is produced by the ciliary body, ciliary processes of the ciliary body. A small amount can circulate to the vitreous chamber, but for the most part it's going to flow through the iris and into the anterior chamber where it's going to be drained by a venous sinus. The aqueous humor not only nourishes the interior surface of the cornea and the surface of the lens, it also provides the correct amount of intraocular pressure. Intraocular pressure is required to keep the vitreous pushing against the retina enough to hold the retina in place. If the vitreous detaches from the retina, then the retina detaches. A detached retina can cause blindness because you're cutting the retina off from its blood supply. On the other hand, if you have too much aqueous humor, the pressure can get so high that it causes glaucoma. And again, this can cause blindness because with too much pressure, you can actually collapse the little blood vessels in the choroid, and that cuts off the blood flow to the retina, killing retinal cells. Intraocular pressure has to be checked by a doctor because just like high blood pressure, you can't feel it. There's no pain or sensation associated with high pressure. Okay, so in this figure, we can see the ciliary processes, or the ciliary body, producing the aqueous humor. Aqueous humor can flow to the anterior surface of the vitreous, but for the most part it's going to flow from the posterior chamber through the pupil into the anterior chamber and get drained into these scleral venous sinuses. The vitreous body is just a large mass of gelatin, and as I've said, it helps stabilize the shape of the eye and keep the retina in place. Okay, finally, the lens. The lens, of course, is going to focus for near or far vision. We'll see how in our next presentation. Problems associated with the lens. The main one is cataract. The lens, of course, has no blood vessels of its own. It's bathed with aqueous humor, but over time, as you age, the interior of the lens can start to deteriorate and get cloudy, and that's what a cataract is. Before modern times, cataracts just caused blindness. Initial cataract surgery was simply to remove the cloudy lens, leaving the patient with very poor vision, needing to wear very thick glasses. These days we actually have artificial lenses that the doctor can pop in place of the removed cloudy lens. Okay, I'll see you next with the physiology of vision. Bye-bye.